Okay, let's try and unpack this. That feeling, that there's just more going on than what we see. The power of belief, maybe unseen forces shaping things.
It's definitely scratching at the edges of the known, isn't it?
Hmm.
And today, we're taking that journey really deep into the world around Helena Blavatsky, HPB, as she's known, and the very start of the Theosophical Society.
And what's great, I think, is our guide, Henry Steel Olcott. He was one of HPB's absolute closest associates. So his account, it's this incredibly intimate firsthand look.
Exactly. You get this perspective on a movement that, kicked up so much fervent belief, but also intense skepticism back in the late 19th century. It's like being a fly on the wall, really.
Totally. So picture it. Late 1800s, seances are a big thing, people trying to contact the dead. This whole wave of interest in the occult is building.
And boom, the Theosophical Society pops up right in the middle of all that.
So our mission, yours and ours, in this deep dive, is to really get a handle on how it started, who the key players were, and some of the, frankly, really surprising events that went down, all through Olcott's eyes, his records.
We're going to explore his relationship, his dynamic with HPB, their investigations into all sorts of phenomena, and the core ideas that really launched the whole movement.
Which immediately brings up, how did Olcott, a guy who started out pretty grounded, conventionally speaking, become so central to all this?
Well, his early encounters with HPB are key, especially around those spirit mediums like William Eddy. That gives us some big clues.
Absolutely. Olcott's coming at this wanting logical answers, right? He sees these supposed spirit forms of Eddy, and he's arguing, look, they're all different sizes, different shapes.
Yeah, he couldn't buy HPB's idea that it was just the medium's double, like an energy copy changing shapes.
Yeah.
He thought, no, these look like different people.
And that just highlights this basic clash in how they saw things early on. Olcott himself admits he didn't really get the Eastern idea of Maya back then, reality being illusory.
Or the whole concept of the plastic nature of the human double, the idea that it could actually manifest differently. It was outside his framework at the time.
Right. HPB is trying to explain things through this totally different Eastern lens, and Olcott's just not buying it. Not initially, anyway.
But what's fascinating, and Olcott points this out, is that HPB seemed to almost respect his need for facts, for evidence.
Yeah, she saw he wasn't just going to accept things blindly, which is kind of interesting for a movement often tagged with blind faith.
Definitely. It said something about her complexity, making these huge claims, but also engaging with the skepticism.
And that initial disagreement, it didn't stop them becoming friends. Good friends, actually. Olcott mentions that by the time she left Chittenden, they were close. She even started using the nickname Jack he gave her in letters.
It shows this real human connection happening alongside all the big spiritual questions, a foundation being laid.
It really does. And that connection helps us understand HPB's own evolving view of spiritualism. There's this incredibly revealing letter she wrote.
Oh, that one to the spiritualist.
Yeah.
It's quite poignant. She talks about her 15-year battle for the blessed truth, traveling everywhere, preaching.
Sacrificing a lot, too. Leaving her home, a comfortable life, to just wander and promote spiritualism. Shows how deep her initial commitment really was.
She saw America as, like, the ground zero.
Yeah.
The birthplace of modern spiritualism. She even compared arriving there to a Muslim approaching Mecca, basically. Huge hopes.
But the letter also shows this real sense of, disappointment setting in. A feeling that maybe, despite all her work defending spiritualism from frauds and scientific attacks, she hadn't actually helped the core movement itself.
That's like she started sensing its limits, perhaps.
Right.
Or that maybe the phenomena people were chasing weren't the whole picture, a potential turning point for her.
Yeah, almost like the phenomena weren't leading to that deeper understanding she was seeking. Which brings us neatly to the demonstrations of, what Olcott saw as actual occult power.
Right, the stuff he witnessed himself, like that weird incident with Senor B and the butterflies, appearing and vanishing out of thin air.
HPB's explanation being that it was an elemental, like a nature force or thought form being transformed somehow.
And Olcott, ever the pragmatist, he's thinking, okay, probably illusions, clever trick, maybe, not actual magic butterflies.
That difference in viewpoint keeps cropping up, doesn't it? As HPB starts introducing him to the idea of Eastern adepts, these advanced spiritual masters often through these staged or seemingly random phenomena.
And initially, a lot of this stuff was attributed to John King, this supposed spirit guide figure. Olcott later reflects that this was probably his first sort of veiled introduction to the masters.
He even mentions having letters, supposedly from these masters, with his own notes on them saying when he received them. Pretty compelling stuff from his point of view.
It is. And his story gets even more complex. He talks about learning first within the African current of this occult brotherhood. Then, after some kind of big psychophysiological change in HPB, he gets shifted to the Indian current under different masters.
This whole idea of a single, sort of hidden, altruistic fraternity of advanced beings,
Yeah.
but divided into currents, like different specializations to help humanity evolve spiritually. It's a huge concept.
Like different divisions in a global spiritual project, each focusing on specific needs. These masters working behind the scenes, unseen, like spiritual currents, the Akash, that cosmic memory bank idea, vital for our spiritual health.
It's a grand vision. But, the obvious question comes up for anyone outside this. Why don't we see them intervening more obviously in history?
Olcott tackles that directly. He points to all the mystics and philanthropists throughout history who he believed were influenced or guided by these depths, even if subtly.
He stresses the personal links, the relationships between these masters and people doing altruistic work, like him and HPB, for instance.
And the first contact could happen in different ways. Visions, maybe strange encounters, and this was crucial for Olcott, through things he already kind of understood, like a spirit seeming to take over a medium. It bridged the gap for him.
Speaking of strange encounters, Signor B again, the Italian artist with supposed occult powers. His story is just wild.
Definitely memorable. Olcott says he saw Signor B literally make it rain on a clear, moonlit night in New York, 1875.
And not just a drizzle. He describes thick, black clouds boiling up seemingly from the moon, spreading fast, then a sudden downpour. No thunder, no lightning, just rain. Sounds like stage magic almost.
Olcott said he felt this intense concentration coming off Signor B like he was in a battle. Signor B's explanation, that humans who develop their inner divine power can control elemental spirits. Their will becomes irresistible, basically.
But then, and this is the kicker, the same guy who supposedly controlled the weather pulls Olcott aside and warns him off HPB, calls her wicked, dangerous, as it's on orders from a great master.
The whiplash is incredible. It's completely contradictory.
And Olcott, credit to him, demands proof, a sign, which Signor B can't produce. Shows Olcott wasn't just swallowing everything whole anymore.
Exactly. And HPB's reaction, apparently she just found it amusing and told Olcott to tell Signor B to basically get lost. Shows her confidence in her own path, I suppose.
It really does. And while all this madness is happening, HPB is also teaching Olcott about what she called demental spirits, laying the groundwork for him to eventually grasp the Eastern idea of elementals, pisachas, bhutas, those kinds of beings.
Olcott mentions trying early on to sort them out in his head, subhuman nature spirits versus like ex-human earthbound ones. He's trying to build a taxonomy.
And crucially, he gets access to this amazing occult library, the Watkinson in Hartford, while he's printing his own book around 1874-75. All that reading really prepped him.
Absolutely. It gave him a framework to understand HPB's explanations and the phenomena he was seeing. It wasn't happening in a vacuum for him anymore.
And that period, the reading, the observing, it also qualified him, in his view, to help HPB write Isis Unveiled. He wasn't just a spectator. He was becoming equipped to collaborate.
And according to HPD, that whole massive project, writing Isis, was overseen by a committee. 7 adepts from the Egyptian branch of this universal mystic brotherhood.
There's that amazing detail about the acrostic, too. The first letters of 6 paragraphs and some circulars spelling out the Egyptian name of the specific adept Olcott was supposedly studying under.
That really blew Olcott away. He saw it as proof of thought transmission over distance. A direct sign.
It reinforced this idea that maybe people could be guided, nudged to do things for this bigger universal work without even realizing they were being influenced.
Which leads back to that tricky question. If masters are guiding things, why let all the scandals and betrayals happen later?
Olcott's answer boils down to karma, the law of cause and effect, and non-interference. You can't just step in and prevent people from making choices and facing consequences, apparently. It messes with their evolution.
The idea is maybe they give mental nudges for necessary actions, things that don't harm the person's free will, but set off these chains of cause and effect for a larger good.
He even suggests things like the discovery of the Rosetta Stone weren't just accidents, but maybe orchestrated events.
And he throws in a personal one. Feeling this random urge to buy a specific newspaper, which led to him meeting HPB and starting the whole Theosophical Society chain reaction. Small choices, big ripples.
He also uses that lovely analogy about sharing merit, how people in Sri Lanka, feeling genuine sympathy for monks being fed, actually share in the good karma of the act. Interconnectedness again.
Now, their actual hands-on investigations into mediums offer another practical angle. Ms. Young's in New York. She's a character.
Oh yeah, apparently quite forceful with her guides, like ordering spirits around,
Well,
and known for this phenomenon of a heavy piano lifting and rocking while she played music.
it sounds dramatic. Olcott, being Olcott, takes HPB along to sea and brings test objects. Eggs and walnuts this time. Always looking for that concrete proof.
And there's even a newspaper clipping from the New York Sun, September 1875, that talks about that specific seance, mentions Olcott's tests, contemporary evidence.
Then you have Mrs. Mary Baker Thayer, the flower medium from Boston, supposedly precipitated flowers, plants, leaves out of thin air.
Olcott spent 5 whole weeks investigating her in 1875. Meticulous.
And his conclusion: he thought she did have genuine ability, but he also caught her trying to fake stuff specifically, simulating matter passing through matter.
But he expresses some sympathy, doesn't he? Suggesting mediums were sometimes driven to tricks because the spiritualist organizations didn't support or guide them properly. A systemic problem, maybe.
It highlights that gray area where genuine phenomena and fraud could potentially mix. And this whole Western obsession with physical mediumship, tables tipping, objects flying, it was so different from Eastern views.
Totally. In the East, that kind of stuff was often seen with suspicion, even horror. Work of low-level spirits maybe hindering their own progress.
The focus there was much more on the spiritual philosophy, the inner path. Physical phenomena were seen as, well, side effects, maybe even distractions, low-level psychic stuff.
Whereas the West, with its more materialistic outlook, maybe needed that physical proof to even consider life after death. Concrete evidence for a non-physical reality.
Olcott points out how Indian traditions, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, even Buddha, warn against getting attached to displaying psychic powers cities. It can derail you from real spiritual growth.
So the argument is that HPB, while she used phenomena to get people's attention in the West, always stressed it was secondary. The philosophy was the main thing.
Like chemical experiments illustrating the science, but not being the whole science. That was her consistent teaching, apparently.
Olcott does seem to regret, maybe, that she spent energy on people who weren't really serious, but acknowledges it did bring some people into the theosophical fold.
And for him personally, seeing her demonstrate that disciplined willpower was crucial. It helped him grasp Eastern spiritual science. He just wished his Eastern colleagues had seen it too.
So where did all her knowledge come from? Olcott's adamant, ultimately, the East. Even if filtered through Western occult writers like Levi, de Maisonneuve, Jennings.
But he's careful to say those Westerners weren't really practical occultists themselves. Maybe Levi slightly. They were theorists, collectors of lore.
His key point is his own experience. He saw HPB use practical psychic powers, seemingly at will, and her explanations lined up with Eastern teachings he later encountered.
And he doubles down on confirming her links to Eastern adepts, saying he had his own interactions with them too. He sees her using Western books like toolboxes.
Right, using familiar concepts to frame Eastern ideas for a Western audience, even knowing those tools were imperfect.
And you have to remember the context. Western occult writers often had to hide things in symbols, metaphors, because of religious persecution. So HPB, with her training and experience, had the key to interpret them. She was the interpreter.
He addresses the criticism that ISIS unveiled, just quotes randomly from classics and newspapers. He says, yeah, but it was always to illustrate whatever point she was making right then. It was functional.
He praises her amazing writing ability in multiple languages. Even if she wasn't always, super methodical, her mind was overflowing.
He compares her mind to Dickens' mug-bejumption, chaotic, busy stuff coming and going, but always thought-provoking, brilliant style, sharp humor.
Olcott feels he learned more from her than anyone. And he thinks critics focusing on her writing style missed the point about her psychic gifts and, frankly, her limited early formal schooling.
He uses that quote about isolation being the punishment of greatness, applying it to HPB, that her detractors just focused on the surface stuff, her sometimes harsh personality.
Yeah, it's a strong defense. Now, shifting gears slightly, Olcott also shares some of HPB's early views from her writings before Theosophy fully formed.
Like her saying that anyone genuinely seeking the great truth will find a guide if they really try. Very proactive.
And her clarification that Rosicrucianism is just one occult sect, not the whole thing, shows nuance early on.
It's interesting she identified as a follower of Western spiritualism back then, even predicting it would become a science, given her later critiques.
And her claiming the true Kabbalah was held by a few Eastern philosophers, whose identities she couldn't reveal. Adds to the mystery layer.
She even anticipates disbelief, saying many will call it imagination, but time will tell, a mix of confidence and realism.
She insists these Eastern philosophers exist, their brotherhoods hidden until humanity wakes up. And she warns strongly against trying to become a practical Kabbalist just from books. You need the key, the thread in the labyrinth.
She defines the difference between white and black magic, warns against the latter, and ends on this note about direct communication between worlds becoming inevitable, calling it spiritualism in the modern sense, like calling America the New World. It's a snapshot of her developing ideas.
And after this point, Olcott says the core occult, theosophical ideas really start coming through clearly in their writing and letters. His own first big public statement is that letter to the New York Tribune, The Immortal Life, August 75.
Where he says basically, yeah, I believe mediumship phenomena are real, but I'm skeptical about who or what is causing them. A clear shift.
And in that same letter, he declares his belief in ancient occult science and says he's had contact with living people doing wonders like Paracelsus supposedly did.
And he clarifies this isn't just HPB or the Mahatmas he heard about. He personally saw elementals in his own room without HPB there through some stranger he met in New York. A direct personal experience.
That really pushes it beyond theory for him, which leads us to the actual formation of the Theosophical Society. The catalyst seems to have been this lecture by Mr. Felt on Egyptian magic.
Felt claimed ancient Egyptian priests were masters of it, could evoke elementals, had formulas he'd deciphered and tested. Big claims.
He even offered to help others test it and exhibit nature spirit in paid lectures. That really got people talking.
Exactly. It was in the discussion after Felt's lecture that someone suggested, hey, let's form a society for this kind of research.
A motion was even passed to circulate Felt's letter among the members. Shows the initial excitement.
Their stated goal was ambitious. Experimentally learn about man's constitution, intelligence, place in nature, with a big focus on mind as will.
That power of will, they believed, was used by Eastern magicians, Western mesmerists. It could influence beings on other planes, even create things by objectifying mental images if your imagination was strong enough, exploring consciousness power.
But despite the big launch, things started slow. Felt didn't come through with his demonstrations.
Right, and Senior B was out, and HPB refused to perform phenomena at meetings, so no star performer, basically.
So you end up with this structure, some notoriety, but few active members, except for HPB and Olcott just burning with enthusiasm.
Judge was there, loyal, but Olcott says he was still pretty raw in occult stuff then. It really was HPB and Olcott carrying the torch.
The Theosophical twins, as they called themselves, sometimes adding their lamp to make a trinity, shows their intense focus and maybe isolation.
They'd reflect on how superficial some visitors were, but their own belief in the masters and the mission never wavered.
Then there's the Baron de Palm funeral, another rather public and chaotic event.
Huge event, held in the Masonic Temple's Grand Hall, thanks to Reverend Fredingham. Shows the level of interest, at least curiosity.
And the crowd was massive, apparently unruly enough to need police. This wasn't some quiet little service.
They even had different tickets, reserved in general. But Olcott felt most people were just there for the spectacle, not out of respect or sympathy.
And the press beforehand, sensationalist, mocking. The World ran a satire piece, set the stage for drama.
Which they got. Someone, an excited Methodist, apparently shouted, "That's a lie," right in the middle of the ceremony.
But Olcott handled it brilliantly, remembered Wendell Phillips, stood silent for a moment, then just boomed, "We're in the presence of death."
Powerful move. Apparently it worked. Quieted the crowd right down. Psychology in action.
The service itself was a mix Orphic hymn, Vedic invocation, litany, Olcott's speech explaining Theosophy's aims.
And he didn't shy away from controversial stuff. Talked about deathbed repentance being useless, preached karma, newspapers reported on it.
There was even applause and hissing when he said the society believed a scoundrel was a scoundrel no matter the prayers. He wasn't pulling punches. Now, connected to the Baron, there was that nasty one where that ISIS unveiled was just compiled from his manuscripts.
Yeah, serious accusation. Dr. Elliot Coos pushed it in a letter, though the New York Sun editor supposedly regretted publishing it later, but the damage was done, spread through hostile papers.
Olcott absolutely refutes it, says, look, I helped edit, corrected proofs, helped with citations, yes, but the authorship, the ideas on this plane, that was all HPB.
So the question remains, where did she get the stuff not easily found in books? Olcott's answer, the astral light, that cosmic library, and direct input from her masters via her spiritual senses.
And he insists he knows this because he worked side by side with her on Isis and other things. He saw the process.
Speaking of the process, the manuscript itself was weird. Consistent handwriting overall, but with 3 or 4 distinct styles that would change every few pages.
Not just tiny variations, different styles. Small and clear, bold and free, ragged and difficult. Sometimes 2 styles on one page, changing maybe after an overnight break.
And the English varied with the handwriting style. Some needed heavy correction, others were practically perfect.
The most flawless stuff, Olcott says, was what she claimed was written for her while she slept, like the start of the chapter on Egypt.
He recalls her showing him a big stack of beautifully written pages one morning, saying a master wrote it for her. Needed 0 editing before printing.
Which brings us back to this idea of external entities, maybe even possession, though that's a loaded term.
Olcott shares that letter from a chief master in 75, making it clear, I'm a living man, not a spirit. You can gain these powers too, through karma and self-effort, grounding it in human potential.
Olcott insists his conscious interactions weren't usually with disembodied spirits, except, maybe, Paracelsus. He had doubts Paracelsus was actually dead, in the normal sense.
And he tells that story. HPB's voice and manner suddenly change. He takes his hand, asks, want to be friends with Theophrastus, Henry, Paracelsus' other name, then snaps back to normal.
And Olcott just happened to be writing about Paracelsus that night, work that ended up in Isis. The timing is suggestive, right?
Plus the theosophical idea that maybe adepts, understanding Maya, don't die like we think.
Yeah.
Like Saint-Germain, who just vanished.
It
has layers.
So authorship of Isis. Olcott concludes it was cooperative. Several distinct writers involved, not just HPB's conscious mind.
HPB even admitted it in letters to family parts on unfamiliar topics were dictated by a master or written by her higher self through her body.
But it's impossible to untangle exactly who wrote what. HPB's personality was the filter, the matrix, shaping the final form, color, expression. Her own quirks influenced it.
He uses the analogy. Different people occupying her body might alter her handwriting style, but they're still using her hand. They don't write in their own script entirely.
The possessing intelligence had to use her brain, her established ways of thinking and expressing things. Like light through stained glass, it gets colored by the medium.
And control was easier if the intelligence naturally resonated with her personality. A closer match meant smoother flow.
He observed that when she was really angry or intense, it often seemed like her main master, the one whose disciple she was occupying her body. His iron will was stronger than hers.
Milder types stayed away during those times, apparently.
Yeah.
The vibes weren't right.
And why not just permanently fix her temper? Olcott suggests it would have killed her. Apoplexy. That fiery spirit was part of her life force since childhood. Suppressing it totally would break the vessel.
He points to her family history. The Dugarukis known for courage, independence, fearlessness. It was in her blood.
HPB herself insisted she wouldn't be controlled by anyone, except the masters she revered. And even them she could argue with. Fiercely independent.
Olcott stresses the years of desperate self-control it took her to maintain a state, allowing communication with the masters. He doubts anyone faced bigger obstacles on the path.
And then there's the physical evidence. The hair. Multiple witnesses saw HPB produce strands of hair totally unlike her own.
He lists 5 specific times she pulled out or cut off strands, gave them to people like Emily Kislingbury, Mrs. Mitchell O'Sullivan, Rosa Bates. Tangible evidence.
And this hair was coarse, black, straight. Her own was fine, light brown, wavy. A stark difference.
Critics said trickery, but Olcott points out instances where the recipient cut the strand themselves. Harder to fake that. He had 2 strands himself. One looked Egyptian, the other Hindu.
The explanation. Maybe the men whose hair it was were temporarily occupying her Mayavic body, her subtle form when the hair was taken. Deeply esoteric stuff.
To explain this possibility of occupation, Olcott brings in the Eastern concept of psychic transfer, or avesha. Starts with prana, the life force, moving through the nadis, the subtle channels.
Describes basic yoga practice. Projecting prana out, drawing it back in. Shows conscious control is possible.
Then the advanced technique. Withdrawing your own life consciousness, pranajiva, and putting it into another body like a corpse to revive it temporarily, via the nostrils to the solar plexus, usually.
He cites the story of Shankaracharya supposedly entering Raja Amaruka's dead body, occupying it gradually from the feet up, a traditional example of this idea.
Then he touches on the afterlife. Physical body dies, decays. Astral body, the doubler soul, carries the karma consequences of actions, thoughts, desires.
And that astral body faces a choice. Purification, reunion with spirit, or deeper immersion in matter, annihilation, big stakes.
A huge moment then. December 17th, 1878, they leave New York for India. Big move.
Just before leaving, HPB writes an article for a Paris journal, responding to critics, describes man as having four principles, a tetractys, early model of their complex view of humans.
She names their masters: Patanjali, Kapila, Canada, ancient Indian sages whose systems influenced Greek philosophy, clearly planting their flag in the East.
But clarifies, not all Indian schools. Excludes materialists like the Charvakas who denied survival after death. Shows discernment.
Interestingly, while those masters generally taught reincarnation as the rule, HPB and Olcott initially called it an exception. Shows their own understanding was still evolving.
It's striking, though, just 6 years after Olcott first heard from a Mahatma, they're actively pushing reincarnation into Western thought, straight from its primeval birthplace. Huge impact.
Back to Avesha, that occupation idea. Olcott shares this recurring observation. HPB would just stop talking mid-sentence, leave the room, return moments later totally changed. Different mood, different topic.
And then she'd struggle to pick up the old conversation, sometimes contradicting what she just said, and get embarrassed or annoyed if reminded. Happened lightning fast sometimes.
Olcott admits he found it really irritating at first. Seemed like random inconsistency.
The explanation he landed on. It takes time for the entering consciousness to sync up with the brain's memory of the previous occupant. That link isn't instant.
So you get that lag, that confusion of ideas or memories during the adjustment. It fit with the Mahatma's explanation and the Shankara story of gradual entry.
He even mentions times the departing someone would say they'd put info in the brain for the next one, or the entering someone would ask what they were just talking about. Little details supporting the theory.
Amidst all this intensity, Olcott also enjoyed corresponding with intellectuals like Charles Carlton Massey and William Stainton Moses. Valuable exchanges?
They had different angles, right? Olcott, HPB, more conservative Eastern occultism. Stainton Moses, more progressive. Massey, the open-minded investigator in between.
Years of letters, sometimes long essays covering psychology, elementals especially. Olcott wishes Stainton Moses' papers were available for comparison.
Stainton Moses started just wanting proof of mediumship, then unexpectedly became a powerful medium himself. Extraordinary experiences.
Shattered his Oxford-trained scientific worldview, forced him to accept new ideas based on direct experience.
His seances were documented weekly in Light by Mrs. Spear, considered a really important record of mediumship back then.
He had a huge range of phenomena, physical and psychic, but he remained skeptical, especially of spirit messages he couldn't verify. Trained mind grappling with the bizarre.
He received teachings via automatic writing stuff he consciously didn't know. Convinced it wasn't him, but distinct spirits he recognized, especially his main guide, Imperator.
Olcott and HPB offered their counter theory. Maybe Imperator was his own higher self, and elementals produced the phenomena under his subconscious will. Different interpretations.
But the similarities between Stainton Moses' phenomena and HPB's were uncanny. Fairy bells, perfumes, lights, precipitated writing, apports, music, changing gems, disintegrating crayons, identical oriental scents, astral symbols, OBEs, a long list.
That similarity naturally drew them together. Stainton Moses was keen for HPB's insights on mastering his own abilities. He saw her as further along the path.
Olcott suggests their exchange influenced Stainton Moses and Imperator's later teachings, and notes the Hindu caution about phenomena being potentially trivial or dangerous.
We get a glimpse of Stainton Moses' later view. Lost sectarian faith, but kept belief in spirit survival. Saw himself as a free man drawing good from all traditions, hoping for progress after death.
Imperator's views on demons and mixed circles clearly showed up in Stainton Moses' writing, even more in private letters. The influence was there.
Olcott reflects on their connection, seeing a guiding intelligence maybe bringing them together, shaping their development through psychic proofs.
Who was Imperator, really? Higher self, adept, unclear, but the parallels were striking. Both had guys presented as an Arab, an Italian philosopher, Egyptians, an English mystic, Platonic, same archetypes showing up.
And the identical phenomena. Olcott felt it was almost inevitable they'd connect. Stainton Moses apparently acknowledged this connection too.
What about Imperator saying he was a spirit? Olcott suggests the teaching was adapted to Stainton Moses' understanding at the time, like HPB initially presenting as a spiritualist, tailoring the message.
Olcott reiterates his own journey from disbelief in spirits to a more nuanced occult view, and his indifference to labels focusing on the underlying truth.
which Saint and Moses shared that dedication to truth above all, even life itself. That was their common ground.
But it wasn't all heavy philosophy. There were funny moments, especially with the press. Like Mr. Curtis, a reporter who later joined the society. Liked a good story.
Took them to a circus once, promising Egyptian conjurers. Turned out to be ordinary Frenchmen. Curtis found it hilarious and wrote a totally fabricated, wild story, Theosophists at the Circus.
Another time, Curtis got them excited about a night watchman's ghost down by the docks. They spent a fruitless night waiting with other reporters. Ghost never showed.
Newspapers had fun with that one. Portrayed them as naive ghost hunters, maybe even scaring the ghost away. Pictures in the paper, members of the Theosophical Society waiting for the ghost of old ship. Slightly embarrassing publicity.
Gives you a sense of the everyday reality mixed with the weirdness. Back to the phenomena. Olcott recalls a discussion about textiles leading to an apport.
Mid-conversation, HPB just produces this fine crepe handkerchief from her clothes. Others confirmed it wasn't there moments before, just appeared.
Olcott recognized the distinct scent and a signature on it linked to a high Tibetan adept he knew of. Connects the mundane to the esoteric again.
HPB casually gives it to him. Then, moments later, produces two identical ones, tells him to take a new one since he saw it appear. Doubling the weirdness.
Olcott confirmed later. The second was an exact copy, down to the pre-Sanskrit ink signature. More than just a simple trick, seemed like.
Then there's Olcott's own attempt at astral projection in '76. Tried consciously to add 3 words to HPB's manuscript downstairs while he was falling asleep.
Remembered the intention clearly. Next morning, HPB says she saw his astral body fumbling with her papers. Corroboration.
And the proof. On the manuscript page, 2 of the 3 intended words, written in Olcott's handwriting. The third started, but unfinished. Tangible result.
How? Olcott speculates his will may be aided by HPB's elementals using graphite molecules, blending intention and subtle energies.
On a lighter note, their domestic life sounds chaotic. HPB apparently had 0 cooking skills. Tried to cook eggs by putting them right on hot coals.
They relied heavily on their maid. When she was off, Countess LP had to help Olcott make a salad once. Gives you a picture.
He mentions O'Donovan, the witty Irish sculptor who did HPB's portrait. Liked his whiskey, liked teasing HPB about Catholicism.
HPB would predictably get outraged. O'Donovan would keep a straight face. Sounds like quite the scene. Humanizes them a bit.
Money was strange, too. The masters supposedly didn't always bail HPB out when she was broke, reusing coffee grounds, doing needlework.
Yet shortly after arriving in New York, they entrusted her with a huge sum, 23,000 francs, for a specific secret mission. A paradox.
Weird instructions. Take it to Buffalo, find a specific address, give it to someone, no explanation, just get a receipt. Very cloak and dagger.
Turns out the recipient was a rich guy about to commit suicide because he'd been robbed of that exact amount. HPB's delivery saved him, supposedly to protect future world events. Grand scale stuff.
And afterwards, HPB completely forgot the guy's name and address. Amnesia again. Underscores her role as just a conduit, maybe.
The paradox. She's poor herself, but handling large sums she can't touch for personal needs. Highlights the demands of her perceived role.
Finally, Olcott sums up HPB's personality. Extremes. Generous, then stingy. Spent money like water. Burned through a huge inheritance in 2 years wandering the world. Flamboyant.
Made friends easily, but lost them easily, too. Turned them into enemies. Socially complex.
But could turn on the charm when needed for her work. Knew how to win people over. Used flattering language. Made people feel special.
Olcott realized later those special pronouncements were maybe spread thin. He felt she wasn't totally loyal or sincere with ordinary folks like him. Saw them as pawns in the master's game.
Maybe shared others' secrets freely. Probably shared his too. But her loyalty to family, and especially the masters, absolute. Would sacrifice anything, even humanity, for their work, Olcott believed. Total dedication to the cause.
So, wrapping up this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've really walked through Olcott's changing view of reality, didn't we? All seen through his intense, complicated relationship with HPB.
Yeah, we've seen her complexity, her abilities, her claimed abilities, and the messy, energetic birth of the Theosophical Society in that specific late 19th century context.
And that mix of Eastern ideas hitting the West, being debated, experimented with in such a personal, direct way. It's fascinating.
We've hit on some really strange parts of the story. Senor B, the Rainmaker, those accounts of possible possession, the weird way Isis Unveiled got written.
And just the constant blend of everyday life, cooking eggs badly, dealing with reporters, and these extraordinary, almost unbelievable events happening side by side.
It leaves you, the listener, with that big question, right? How much do unseen influences, whatever you think they are, shape what we believe, how we see reality?
And how do we develop the skill, the discernment, to tell real insight
Hmm.
from, well, from illusion or maybe wishful thinking? Olcott's journey is a case study in grappling with that. Started skeptical, ended up embracing the extraordinary.
It really challenges our own assumptions, doesn't it? We definitely encourage you, if you're intrigued, to look deeper into HPB, Olcott, the Theosophical Society's beginnings. Maybe even check out ideas like elementals, astral projection.
Yeah, it's a huge, fascinating landscape out there. Still sparks debate, still makes you wonder, even now.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.